This content is brought to you by Huawei. The ways to monitor symptoms for asthma patients simply aren't convenient enough, which is why Dr. Peter Tinschert founded Resmonics. Resmonics turns your smartphone into your guardian angel that monitors your symptoms while you sleep and alerts you in the event of a medical necessity. Enjoy this video interview directly from MWC in Barcelona. So welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time, Peter. I'm very excited to get to know you better, get to know the startup better. And, investors love to hear first about the people and the team that is behind it. So just to get started, tell us quickly who you are.
Sure. Thanks for the invitation. So I'm Peter. I did study originally psychology in my bachelor's and in my master's, but then I moved more towards the business administration side of things in my master's, and I actually did afterwards the PhD in management. For some reason, it's called a PhD in management, but the research I've been doing is actually in digital medicine for respiratory diseases.
Okay, very cool. And where did you study?
In my bachelor in Germany and in my master, and then I moved to Switzerland for the PhD, University of St. Gallen.
Okay, very cool. I just graduated from St. Gallen a year and a half ago.
Congrats.
So, very nice to know where you did your PhD. Tell me a little bit about, starting your own company is probably one of the toughest things and takes a lot of stress and also, uncertainty. So maybe why did you start in the first place to do your own company?
Yeah, I think there are multiple answers to that question. So the first one being that, and that's the most obvious one, I've been in a PhD with a super interesting research project where there was just so much potential afterwards, not only from a research side, but also from a commercial side, but even more than that from a user side, right? So what we do is we are active in digital health so that you have this opportunity to help patients at scale is, I think, if you have the chance to do it once in your life, give it a shot. So I think that's one part of the answer. And the other part of the answer, before my PhD, I was working in consulting for some time. Mm-hmm. So I've realized that, it's also a great job, but I think it's better if you, have the opportunity to really shape your own vision and work on it. And I think that is a privilege in a way that you can do in entrepreneurship. Mm-hmm. So that's why I decided to go for that direction.
Cool. Tell me, you just mentioned about the commercializing of your PhD. How did you recognize this opportunity? What were kind of the parameters or the KPIs that you were looking at when you did your market research to say this is something that you want to take to the next level?
Yeah, so the first one was quite intangible. So we started in our research project with focus groups. Mm-hmm. And we were looking at patient group which is known for not being very compliant to the treatment. So these are asthma patients. They have quite often, they feel good and they stop taking the medication, which is not ideal for the disease. And we basically have seen in our focus groups that, they responded quite badly to a lot of ideas that we proposed. But the idea that we are now following in Resmonics, actually, that's the one idea which they really appreciated. So that was the first starting point. So, not necessarily going through a lot of statistics. You can do that too, right? It's a large market. You have 550 million patients suffering from these diseases globally. So there's a lot of potential. That's one way of looking at it, But I think it really helps also to talk to people directly and see whether it addresses a pain that they have or whether it doesn't. And we felt that it does. So that's why we decided to move forward with the project from an entrepreneurial perspective.
Cool. And one more question about this transition. When you're in academics and you do your research, the transition to business is not so easy all the time. How was that for you?
Yeah, I think there are some challenges for sure, but I was also lucky because the PhD that I was doing was already connected a bit to industry. Mm-hmm. So during my PhD, I had the first contact to the CSS Insurance, who also became our first investor. Mm-hmm. So it was never for me that I, was working in research without looking at the outside world at all, but it actually was the other way around. The outside world always influenced what we were doing, in the ivory tower of research. Mm-hmm. So that was, I think, quite helpful. So it was not that much of a mindset change as one would expect, but was already set up that way from the start. So that was extremely helpful.
So let's talk a little bit about your startup. That's the main part of this video. So give me a quick rundown. What is Resmonics?
Sure. So Resmonics is a startup that is active in digital respiratory medicine. We are using the smartphone's built-in sensor, for example, the microphone, to automatically detect symptoms at night. And we use these symptoms to then make an inference about the patient's health. So you can call it the early warning system that is optimized on convenience for patients, because they only need to place the smartphone in the bedroom at night. And based on the research that we have put in and all the analysis that we have done on the data so far, we are able to offer an automatic service. And that is something that is missing currently in the patient journey. So all the tools that you use today are, require a patient to put active effort into it, which they usually don't do. So this is where we come in and have a passive monitoring system in place for these patients.
How does it work from a technical perspective? So I put my phone next to me before I fall asleep.
Yeah, so it's basically an artificial intelligence that uses the smartphone's microphone to detect symptoms. So that's actually quite, an advancement in the last years that we've seen, that you are able to get these really granular patterns out of the audio stream. And there you can, so we focus on nocturnal cough. So that's basically what this AI is doing. It's continuously waiting for a cough to occur. And if a cough occurs, it basically just writes down there was a cough, and that's, tracked in the database. That's the first symptom that we start. We will approach multiple other symptoms and biomarkers in the future, but that's the starting point for us. And then we use this information, we match it against the research that we have done in our PhDs, and we use that to make an inference for the patient. So not only to quantify symptoms, because the information by itself is not really that interesting, right? If I tell you, Cedric, you coughed 15 times last night, yes, you will tell me, okay, that's great, but what I do with this information, and I think this is the added value that we can provide through research. We cluster that into 3 different categories: green, yellow, red. So you can, look up at your smartphone every morning, how is your respiratory health doing from the perspective of symptoms at night. And that's the setup that we have developed for these patients. And of course, because I think it's an important point to mention here that, we focus very much on privacy of patients. So no data is being uploaded to the cloud. The AI is running locally on the device. So, there's no audio data leaving the smartphone, because that's, of course, would be quite a privacy infringement for patients.
So the idea is, let's say, like a meter away from your head?
So up to 3 meters, it works quite well. So we don't see any decrease in
3 meters is far.
Yeah. So it's not necessarily next to your head. You can put it on the table that you have in your bedroom. And again, you can put it in airplane mode. So there is no need, because many people are worried about, like the smartphone radiation or
just messages.
Exactly, or just messages. Yeah. In the clinical studies, we had to deal with a lot of these concerns, because we recruited patients that usually don't use smartphones so much, right? So we heard a lot of concerns about, the smartphone, there's like some radiation at night. I don't feel comfortable with it. So that's extremely, useful to put the smartphone in the airplane mode for this reason.
You just briefly said, what you have so far. What are kind of like the milestones that are ahead of you for the next couple of months?
Yeah, so what we have been basically doing for the last months is to take the technology and CE certify it as a medical device. And we have completed this just last month, so that's a class 1 medical device. Thank you. So that means that we can now go into the market. I think what's important to point out is that Resmonics is not another app that you put on your smartphone, but instead it is a software component that can be integrated into other apps. So it's a B2B or B2B2C model. That's what we've set up. So the next milestones are market penetration. So to go into the market in different countries with different customers, and then also close the next financing round, which we plan for the end of this year.
As entrepreneurs, we have to think kind of like in long term, and usually long term in the regular population is, let's say, 1 to 2 years. We try to think in decades. Where do you hope, your company to be in, let's say, a decade from now?
What we are basically doing is, try to establish evidence-based artificial intelligence for respiratory diseases within applications that are already existing. And the vision is, to become a global hidden champion. So our ambition is not that, patients know who Resmonics is or what Resmonics does, but instead, to help companies to build up a product that is evidence-based, that uses the most recent technology without them having to invest, multiple years and millions of funding into their own research, which is of course quite risky, because many companies try to do what we're doing. They failed at it, because you really need to take a lot of time. You need to be very careful when collecting the data. And I think that, the vision is to really become part of basically the next wave of digital respiratory medicine solutions.
And tell me, what is the business model that you're aiming at? It sounds like a B2B model that then is used for the customer. So you're integrating with what Samsung and Nokia's and companies like that?
Exactly. So OEMs are not our first priority. So for starters, we focus on health apps that are, for example, for asthma patients, COPD patients to manage their disease. So the business model there, is either B2B or B2B2C. It always depends a bit on, the customer, what the customer is actually doing. Mm-hmm. I think, in healthcare, the long-term strategy has to always be to strive for reimbursement. But until we get there, there could be like an out-of-pocket payment from patients, or it could be like, covered by our customer. But in the long term, we need to move towards the reimbursement. And there are already many projects being, successfully moving into that direction, particularly in Germany. Mm-hmm. But it's still an emerging space, digital health.
And tell me, so for now, you're pre-revenue, so you're not making any revenues yet. And when is it planned for?
Yeah, so by the end of this year, we hope to go live in 4 European countries at least, cool. Maybe even 5. We will start with pilots. So that's usually how you have to do it if you have a new technology that is quite innovative, to show to your customer that it works, show to patients that it's worth doing it. And I think once that is done, then we will switch into the revenue mode.
Cool. And tell me about you briefly said about the fundraising of the end of the year. How much money have you raised so far?
So we have raised so far, I cannot disclose the full sum here, but we have raised more than 500,000 Swiss francs for Resmonics, and our investors being the CSS Health Insurance in a pre-seed round. And we won Venture Kick Stage 3, which was 150K convertible loan.
For the end of the year, what's your aim? How much do you want to raise?
So for the end of this year, we want to raise between 1 and 1.5 million Swiss francs. I think it also depends a bit on the milestones that we are about to hit in the next weeks and months. Sure. So if that goes very smoothly and we can demonstrate that or we have de-risked the investment considerably for our startup, I think we can move more towards the 1.5 million Swiss francs. Mm-hmm. But depending on which milestones we are still needing to hit, it will be like around 1 million Swiss francs.
I want to talk a little bit about the industry that you're in, because I think this in general is a huge market, and I would love to learn for you a little bit more about like what that market is and how big the size is. In the introduction, you mentioned it briefly, so maybe we can do a little bit of a more deep dive of the market itself that you're trying to tackle.
If you look at the patient numbers, you're talking about 550 million patients who are suffering from respiratory diseases of a chronic nature, right? So asthma, COPD, cystic fibrosis, all of these diseases. But there's also on top of that, there are acute respiratory diseases on which we also focus. And I mean, like the last 18 months have been dominated by one disease in particular, which is also, of course, relevant for us. So I think the market size is quite enormous. Mm-hmm. The challenge with digital health is always, how to penetrate the market. And I think what we see is now that there's an acceleration happening in the market, but it's still, let's say, a rather novel market. So many customers or many end users, are very interested in trying out these solutions, and there are already quite some success cases. Mm-hmm. But it's not as established as maybe the diabetes market or the cardiovascular market, which have been the focus of digital health in the last 5 years in comparison to respiratory health, which is now a very emerging topic.
Good. So let's talk a little bit about the ecosystem in Switzerland. I'm always curious to hear kind of like how different people see it. What is your overall perception of the Swiss startup ecosystem?
I think it's a very strong ecosystem. I mean, us being here talking in Barcelona from the Mobile World Congress as a startup that has, closed its first financing round at the beginning of this year. It's, it already shows you the opportunity that you are having. And I think you have in Switzerland, you have very strong universities, which is a big plus also for us, to attract talent. I think you can get, we're from Zurich, so through, for example, ETH, but also through the business schools like, University of St. Gallen, you get basically all the people that you need to found a successful company, and everything is, quite close to another. And you of course have a great, or it's rather easy to get to know the people that are relevant in the network or in the ecosystem. So I think, you have many opportunities as an entrepreneur and many different programs you can participate in. So I would say it's a very strong ecosystem. Sometimes as an entrepreneur, you have to watch out, because there's so many competition, so many opportunities that you really need to keep your focus, which is of course extremely important.
Sure, absolutely. And you already had your first financing round. How was the interaction with the investors?
For us, we were in a quite unique position back then, right? So we have done the PhDs, we had like the first ideas, and then all of a sudden we went into a negotiation about the first round, and we already knew the CSS from our PhDs, so we had a great relationship. So it was actually quite I would say a very nice entry step for us into the world of entrepreneurship, because it is very helpful to think about the investment case not only from the startup perspective, where you have like, let's say, which milestones you want to hit, how much money you need, but also from investors' perspective, right? Which is has a lot to do about risk, how attractive an investment can be. So thinking about investment from these perspectives was also really helpful for us and a nice entry step into entrepreneurship.
Do you also see like ways that like the local ecosystem could improve?
On top of my mind, yeah. I think I mentioned it before a bit, that you have like so much choices that sometimes I think
decision fatigue or
it's a bit over choice, right? So which, let's say, competitions to participate in and all of that, but that's just like one part of it, that there is such a great choice, and it's also actually for entrepreneur, I think it's a good training to really focus on what's important. So that's after, I think there may be even the upside of it's always better to have too many than too few opportunities. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter how strong the ecosystem is, you still have to make it in a way on your own with your company, because people can help you a lot, set up relationships, with customers and all of that, or help you to do that. But at the end of the day, you have to deliver. So that's what I think every startup faces.
Absolutely. The next topic that I would like to discuss with you is about like mental health and productivity. It's a topic that is dear to my heart, and I try to bring out a little bit more of this content, because I see like it affects a lot of entrepreneurs, and it's good if you hear other opinions and other perspectives. So have you ever faced any kind of like mental health challenges while building your company, like too stressful or close to burnout or anything like this?
Yeah, so I think the main challenge for me are the constant up and downs. So you get used to it after some time, but there are days where everything is, it's just working out great, like a customer signs a letter of intent, you make the next step, towards, like hiring, you have a very interesting lead, maybe somebody for your advisory board whom you wanted to talk to, so you feel very empowered by that. And then, on the next day, like your technology fails for whatever reason, or, like your, some investor you were talking to is all of a sudden no longer interested, you don't get any response to the email that you sent out, and you have absolutely no idea why. So that's, I think, for me, this constant up and downs. I think for me, the issue is just, sometimes it's you cannot celebrate the highs as much as you should, because, you have the expectation that, tomorrow, most likely, you will get another setback. So, maybe not celebrate too much. And I think that makes sense from like a rational perspective. But I think also it's important for a startup to like embrace the wave you're currently on, because, you also need to have the momentum.
Absolutely. So how do you do this? Like, how do you celebrate those highs?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we were quite limited by the Corona crisis, of course, right? So if you're in your home office all day, that's what you can do for a couple of weeks now, and I think we're starting to do that more and more now. But for the last 18 months, I think it's been like celebration has been more of a like empowerment within the team. You try to support yourself, but it's not that you can do like a dedicated big celebration of it. So I think sometimes you don't celebrate like in an outside way, but you celebrate in a way for yourself. You just need to embrace it on a level. But again, right, I think it was challenging for everybody in the last 18 months to do any major celebration outside of work.
Absolutely. And how do you see that? Some people call it work-life balance. Some people call it work-life integration. Is this something that like, you have put in some thoughts on like how you want to deal with this, or like how you want to, schedule your day?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, that is, I think, one of the most challenging aspects as an entrepreneur. How do you divide the 24 hours that you have throughout the day? And I think what's also then the challenge is in the hours that you set aside for non-work, to really not be still in the mental mindset of, work. I try to schedule my week in a way that I still have some free time. But I have to admit that, the home office wasn't for me. It wasn't really that helpful because, I have a 2-room apartment in Zurich that I'm sharing with my girlfriend. So, you have basically, if you go to the office, it's like the one room. And if you go to bed, it's the other room. And, you alternate between both of these rooms. And then the weather outside, if it's raining, let's say there is only a limited amount of opportunity to shape work life in a balanced way. Yeah, but I think now with the summer, I see that, like going for a hike in the mountains and, just also being here in Barcelona, I think is a great example of how you can combine it, right? So you have great events that you are doing on the outside and, you are able to, have nice dinner here and meet a couple of interesting people. But then also, you're, for example, at MBC and you're working there.
The things that I'm always curious to hear is about productivity. It's such a wide range of like what people tell me, like how long they can be productive and what they do to stay productive. Some people say like they can be productive for, let's say, 2, 3, 4 hours a day. Sometimes people say like 16 hours a day. How do you define your own productivity and what tools do you use to stay productive?
Like sometimes I have the feeling that I work for a lot of hours of the day, but I wasn't as productive as on other days where I really had like this what you call in psychology, the flow experience, right? Where you're just in the right mindset, and the task that you're doing is, it's so hard that you need to really focus, but it's not too hard that you feel overwhelmed. And then it's, like 1 or 2 hours and you really get a lot of work done. And then other days you don't get done, like as much work as you would like to do, even though, you have like worked for a longer time. So I think what's important is, to set up your day in a way to keep productivity, that you have focus times where you can really work dedicated on a task that, also involves like content, for example, creating a PowerPoint or, like doing like a financial forecast. And there it's really like a time that is blocked. And then the rest of the day or the other hours, you can spend, writing emails, looking into this, looking into more explorative topics. And I think that is quite important to do it because, otherwise, if you just sit in front of Outlook and the emails are coming in and then you get the Slack and the Teams channel. Yeah, exactly. You're quite cramped easily. I think there's a huge upside of, like having really these focus times throughout the day.
So what's your favorite book and why?
So I would say it's Steven Pinker's Enlightenment Now, or at least that's the one in the last 5 years that I like the most. Yeah, because it's important to, for us understand that there is a lot of progress happening, even if we don't see it, and, that we need to be grateful for that.
If you could decide for your company for an exit or an IPO, what would you choose and why?
I would choose an exit. I think our technology is destined for that because I think we can integrate very nicely into already existing service portfolio, which, goes towards the direction of an exit.
What is a successful entrepreneur for you?
So I think that is somebody who, is capable of doing a lot of things with very limited resources and able to adapt quickly. I don't think a successful entrepreneur is somebody who, executes exactly the plan that he has for the next 5 years, yes. But rather whatever life throws at him or her is able to, adjust and to still get things done.
If you look at your company and if you think of one reason your startup could fail, what would it be?
I mentioned it before, it's a bit on the market side. So it's a growing market with a huge potential also through COVID. But still, it's always like a shift in paradigm if you move into the digital world. And I think patients are embracing it at this moment. But, what's the speed of growth there? This is something that is for us as a startup super interesting to observe.
And what is success in life for you?
I think it has to do a lot with independence and freedom. So to be able to do what you want when you want to do it, and I think that's what, of course, entrepreneurial life is great to embrace, right? Because it's challenging, but you can decide over your own fate, at least to some extent. I mean, you have investors, right? So they of course also expect certain things of you.
Yes, and the last question for today would be: what is your best advice you've ever gotten, or that you want to give over for the next generation?
Yeah, I think it's regarding advice itself. So, be careful about all the advice you're getting as a young entrepreneur. You can talk basically to anybody and you get a lot of advice on how you should run your company, what you should be doing. And I think it's really important to only, focus on the advice from people that you are reaching out to for this specific topic. So not to accept advice from everybody because we'll just overload your system.
Right. So just to be proactive of who you're asking with what topic or what question.
Exactly. If you approach somebody with a business background because you want to learn about the business model for your company, then it's very important to listen. But if meet somebody who maybe is a physician and they start talking about your business model, which like everybody has a lot of ideas when it comes to startup, then maybe you should be careful how much weight you put into it. Sometimes it's also great. So it's a rule of thumb, I would call it, not necessarily an iron law.
Sure. Good, Peter. Thank you so much for your time. And it was great to get to know you better and Resmonics better. So I wish you much success in the next couple of years and decades. And hope to see you soon at some point on your journey.
Sure. Thank you very much, Cedric, for this opportunity to introduce you to what we're doing at Resmonics.